Hello there and welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. Good afternoon, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, dignitaries from around the world and distinguished guests. We're thrilled that you're back with us. And of course, a sincere thanks from all of us here at ABLF to His Highness Sheikh Nahyan Mubarak Al Nahyan, the Cabinet Minister, Minister of Tolerance and Coexistence here in the UAE, for that very inspiring and uplifting opening address. And of course, we want to thank him for his continued support and commitment to ABLF. He is indeed very special and near and dear to all of our hearts here. For the whole team at ABLF, we thank him for joining us. Now, of course, the ABLF Talks Live, we're going to begin by discussing the current economic crisis and really the challenges on the road to stability. So, of course, we want you to stay engaged with us right throughout the day and support us on social media, hashtag ABLF City. So that's hashtag ABLF City. We're going to be with you right throughout the day, and we're going to look now at the long road to economic stability, and we've determined it's going to be probably a little longer than we might have planned. I'd like to welcome, of course, the Cabinet Minister and UAE Minister of Economy to the ABLF stage, and of course this whole session and the ABLF is hosted in partnership with the Ministry of the UAE, Federal Government of the Economy. So we're delighted to have with us. And I want to welcome Your Excellency Abdulla bin Touq Al Marri, the Cabinet Minister and Minister of the Economy. Thank you so much for being with us, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you for having me. And I would like to as well to thank the ABLF team as well for hosting us today to talk about the long road to the economic stability in the UAE and the region. I think it's important to discuss this at the moment and really shed some lights for the economy as well and what we're doing in the Ministry of Economy.
Indeed, it's a busy time for the ministry and a very, very busy time for you. I'm very honored to have this opportunity, my first time to talk with you, and indeed, congratulations on your role. You were appointed in July at a very, very busy time in the country's history, it will probably go down as, but also at a time of uncertainty and upheaval. So well done for taking on this role. I'm sure it's been a busy few months. So perhaps you'll maybe bring us up to date with how busy you've been in the past few months, making sure that you've got that cooperation and cohesion in the government, and particularly with the Ministry of Economy.
I think, just to say that I actually passed the 90 days marker yesterday. I was appointed on the 5th of July, and yesterday was the 90 days mark. And I think looking back on the last 90 days of work that we've been doing in the Ministry of Economy, taking on the ship, is extraordinary work. I think there's a lot of work happening internally in governance and policies and regulations and things that as well. But it gave me a bit of more time to really rethink. Coming in the middle of a pandemic and a crisis, I always say we're not expert in pandemics, but I think coming in the middle of it, I think we can say we started being experts, understanding what really needs to be done, what's working, what's not working. Let's scrap things off the table here, really think about the future of the economy. You know, the pandemic and the crisis really shows fragility in sectors and clusters. And I think it's important to really reassess and analyze these clusters and sectors of the economy. Will it work for us in the next 10 years? Will it work out for us in the next 5 years? Who knows? But this is something that we need to figure it out at the moment. And just previously, before this meeting, we had the Recovery Council that has been created by His Highness. As you know, we have 33 initiatives that has launched with His Highness back in August, after the first 30 days being in the office in the Ministry of Economy. These 33 initiatives, we started putting it post-COVID, and now it grew from 33 to 38 initiatives. We have completed a couple of them, and they will come to the market very soon, these initiatives. Can't announce them now, but they're going to come in very soon, and shows you as well how the team in the UAE here, from ministers, from director generals, from people in the government, really working together to understand how can we meet in a way where we can actually free a little bit of challenges, red tape, bureaucracy, and as well something on the fiscal part and as well on the economical part.
Of course, COVID-19 has had a profound effect on billions of people around the world, on their business, on their livelihood, and even on personally. I think the impact will be felt and indeed will be remembered. And the global economy continues to be weak, and that recovery will probably be different in many areas around the world. But again, a time that calls for great leadership on this. How would you say the UAE has actually responded?
We responded, before coming into the Ministry of Economy. I used to be the cabinet secretary of the cabinet in the UAE, and I remember back in March where we actually started feeling the COVID-19 influence in the area. We started moving very agile. I think we did one thing. Note to mention is we had a cabinet meeting every week. The amount of legislations, regulations, decrees that came out in a matter of 3 weeks was enormous. Never happened in the time of the UAE, and I think it's important to mention that. I think the amount of work that has been done, agility came into place. There's a lot of meetings that happened, a lot of stimulus packages came on the federal level, on the local level, and I think it's important to mention that. And this brings us back to our leadership, His Honor Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the way he adapts, the way he thinks, the way he sets the way forward on being very adaptive. And adaptation is very important in the aspect of any government to survive, to move forward. And it really showed us as well some of the work that we need to work on the future is how to be more adaptive, more agile, especially in the laws and regulations that we have and we set.
Indeed, of course, with your role with the executive office, I think you're very used to taking swift action, supporting quick decision making, and indeed now you're bringing this to the Ministry of Economy as well. But how important is this ability, I think, to, as you say, be agile, be more agile, and also to value that non-stop communication. And I think we're really seeing that in the UAE, and that, of course, sending those strong messages out, every week, every day, and making sure that the people are connected and that they know what's going on and know what the government is doing. There's an element too of transparency, which must be so important.
I think the most important part we do in the UAE, we're very approachable. Our doors are always open. We have a lot of access to a lot of business people, to the market. We really listen. And I think the last 90 days, I was on a fact-finding mission, trying to understand the challenges. And it came at the right time because it came in the pandemic. So we spent a lot of time listening, meeting people without really saying what we're going to do. It's more about understanding the current situation, the current issues that really faces businesses, the market, and as well understand how can we drop some ideas and say, what can we do if we do this or we do that, and would this help or would that help, and really understand the solution that really can take us further and boost us to the future. I think that's something which is very important. Looking at it from different angles, going back to my previous job as well as in the Executive Office of His Highness, we really had time over there to really think deep about strategy, to think deep and looking at things in a different way, tackling issues in a different manner as well for the future of the economy and the UAE.
The government has a huge role to play, but also we look at the role of the central bank, the role of private banks, the international organizations. Everybody really has to come together at a point like this and address the economic ramifications of the pandemic and, of course, what they're going to put in place for the economy. So also, I believe that partnership is absolutely vital. And again, coming from the leadership at the government, making sure that the private and the public sector is completely engaged and probably aligned when you look towards an economic recovery. It must also help you to get the input from, people who have long established businesses here in the region and to keep that dialogue open.
True, and I think it's important. This dialogue is very important. And I think one thing which really happened in the UAE, in that kind of dialogue, the businesses didn't really get affected with the government services. Our government services were delivered without any disruptions, and this is something which really helped businesses deliver what they need to deliver. The UAE believed in the digital world long time back with launching a lot of strategies in the digital transformation area. And this really brings into the support that helped the SME sector, considering its potential to open up, broadens future horizon, and enhances resilience and sustainability of the economy. As well, if you look at the UAE model, which is very important, of advancing and stimulating the economy. It takes all these factors into consideration forward, and I think this is something which is very, very important. Moving towards a digital economy, it accounts in the UAE for at least 4.3% of the UAE GDP in 2019. And looking at that, how would probably the pandemic and the COVID-19 could help boost the digital economy in the UAE further than 4.3% in the next 5 to 10 years.
When we look at the role of technology, here we are today having this great forum here, thanks to the great wonders of technology, although they're not even wonders anymore. This is now part and parcel of our everyday life. But the importance of that technology, I mean, the UAE probably ahead of many, many countries in the region in terms of making sure, and I think particularly for government services, we're all very familiar with how efficient that they have worked because the processes have been put in place. But that technology has made a huge difference in terms of how you will work in government and in terms of, again, the communication and the role of government. I think it's probably escalated the use of technology, would you say, and the fact that there'll be no turning back from this one. We'll probably just learn a lot more.
Of course, and I think looking at it with His Highness Sheikh Mohammed going back in 2001, 2002, launching back then the Dubai Internet City, moving towards government services going online. I remember the days when we worked with him, with His Highness, on the aspect of putting all the government services on the mobile phone, on the apps. And that's what really pushed forward the way that today the UAE government, not just federal, but federal local government as well, thinking about how can we digitize. And the digital transformation in the government itself can be measured. And there's a lot of policy reforms that happened and adopted by the government. We're still adopting. We're still reforming the digital. As you know, the space and era is moving faster than us. And it's changing in a matter of months, and I think we need to be adapted to that, understanding how can we be ready for future, how can we provide services without any interruptions, ensuring there is a continued supply chain of delivery of goods, services during this period. And there's no doubt that digitalization is here to stay, and it defines a new economy.
Indeed, here to stay, and I think this is something that the private sector also needs to embrace, as well as the government, and indeed right across the board. Because when we look at flexibility and agility, as you talk about, what more can people do? I mean, how do we actually bring more people on board? Because I think that transition is in place, and indeed, as you say, the government's well on the way. Many companies are well on the way. But how do we actually bring everybody on board to make sure that there's a sustainable future post-COVID?
I think there should be more public-private partnerships that should take and reshape the future to build more sustainable world. I think that's something which really needs to come together. And it's important to understand that the PPPs are the future of the world of economy, the sustainability part. There's a lot of expectation on the role of businesses, corporation, and how they evolve to focus more deeply as well on the environmental and social aspects. And this is just not on this aspect as well, but beyond being just a temporary response to the pandemic, this is a trend that reflects a fundamental rethinking of the role of the government, businesses to play in creating more sustainable, equitable, and inclusive society. I think this is something which is to be held with, and there's more work needs to be done on that. Yes, we are really looking at the pandemic and the COVID-19, but there's a lot of work could be done on these areas where we can come together, both public and private, on the same table.
Of course, only this week the Purchasing Managers Index came out, the PMI, and the UAE on the right side of that figure. Obviously, anything over 50 is good, and it shows economic progress and hope for a recovery. It might not be too high over 50, but the fact that it is over 50 is always reassuring. How important is it too that these economic indicators are out there? And again, I suppose for the sentiment of business in this region and for the sentiment of global investors to be looking at the UAE.
I think it's what really looks, and I think there is something which will come up very soon out today on the aspect of how ready the government or the economy and how resilient the economy is in the future is to bounce back after the COVID-19. The question is when the COVID-19 will stop and we start recovery. That's the major point. Are we in the recovery phase at the moment? Are we still in the COVID-19? Are we in lockdown? Are we not? I think what we learned from the first lockdown that we could lock down the whole country and the whole nation until we looked at the issue. But this second peak is very vital. It's very tricky understanding the economical part and the social impact as well of it. I think it's important to understand that the economy of the UAE really shows agility, bouncing back. People went back to different ways of dealing with businesses, working from home, working from abroad, and as well understanding that the UAE still show that the digital technologies in it had a huge emphasis on the businesses, helping them to deliver what they need to deliver in short period of time. And hopefully we can learn from this. This is something that we show and how we can build this kind of resilience as well.
Yeah, and that resilience will be needed around the world now. Of course, here at ABLF Talks and at all of the ABLF forums, it's very much about bringing the UAE and Asia together. And when you look at, the trade relations that exist, the social relations, the human relations, Asia indeed a very, very important trading partner, the whole continent with the UAE. How again will those ties be strengthened? Because sometimes we look around the world today and perhaps it's not becoming as global as we once thought. And of course, the pandemic has prevented a lot of that trade. It's prevented travel. We don't get to go visit many of our colleagues and they don't get to come here. But again, how important is that relationship with the continent of Asia for the UAE?
It's very important. I think there are numerous opportunities that exist at the moment for the UAE, for both government, businesses, and organizations to partner globally. I think the support of the pandemic recovery, especially in the areas of digital technology, innovation, SMEs, trade, logistics, is very, and among others, is a very important part of it. But in terms of the intra-Asian trade opportunity presented by, is especially on the e-commerce must be exploited more. I think there should be a huge exploitation on that we can work together. There's an advent of technology has played and will continue to play a critical role in removing barriers to trade and investment, and especially the digital trade on the longer term for sustainable impact on economies.
Of course, right throughout the year, we'll have ABLF forums whereby we can engage with the ministry and engage with all of our colleagues from Asia, and hopefully in person see more of them. I'm getting some questions in here, so I think it's probably a good time to put a few to you. And one that has come in asking, which sectors of the economy do you think are likely to recover faster and what might perhaps take a little bit more time, and why?
I think the one, starting with the easy one, I think the one which goes on very slowest is probably will be the airline and the tourism. And I think not just on the UAE, but this is on the global sectors of the world. Tourism is showing a very slow down of recovery after the COVID-19. We still haven't taken any summer vacation, especially for me. And I think it's important to look at that. But the more faster one is those who are on the digital platforms, those who are invested on digital and the digitalization will recover faster. Those who have innovated from the current deal, or they conduct their businesses and they move faster to digital, they will see more recovery into the aspect. I think it's important to note these practices that happen in the UAE that show that digital is the way that can help the economy to recover on the longer term.
Indeed, there'll probably be no vacation for you for a while now. You're only in the job a few months, so we need to make sure that you're comfortable, and that's our excuse anyway, that we want you to stay busy for a few more months, and there will be pressure and great demands on you, of course. But again, that side of the business, and indeed I was talking to the head of Dubai Tourism not too long ago, Mr. Marri, of course, His Excellency, telling me too of some of the initiatives too, but we're beginning to see them. And I think we're beginning to see people who want to come back, and slowly the aviation, but something, of course, that there'll be great emphasis on. Another question that's come back here, talking about sustainable business, looking at the environment as well. Do you think that can actually help develop a more sustainable economy in the longer run?
Absolutely. I'm a big supporter to sustainable businesses. I think, and as government as well, We have launched many strategies, especially for the future. We see sustainable businesses are actually the next part of the economy. The more sustainable the businesses are, the better they can actually adopt and more invested in the research and development as well, which we would like to attract in our future strategies. We've been working very closely with the Ministry of Industry and Manufacturing and Advanced Sciences and Technology as well on the aspect of how can we attract businesses and companies that comes in the way where it actually have a lot of sustainable approaches in their strategies and the way they conduct businesses.
I have another question here from Salam Badarfi, and he actually asks, what do you think are the next steps in the UAE, particularly in the next 5 years, in terms of technology and innovation? And, in your background as the former CEO of the Dubai Future Foundation, you're used to working with startups, with new creative people who are out there with new ideas. I suppose this is something that really will escalate. So 5-year forecast, when we look at technology and innovation, what might we expect for Dubai? Not Dubai and indeed the UAE.
I think what we expect is the UAE will have more appetite to allow testing of future technology and innovation, because technology and innovation needs to be deregulated or allowed to be regulated into some certain extent where it's allowed to be experimented. The future technology and innovation needs experiments in many ways. And I think with Dubai Future Foundation, they launched the Dubai Future District, which allows companies and businesses to operate in a 1 mile space with relaxed regulations to help these technology develop much better, evolve and innovate in ways that actually can design the future of economy, not just for the UAE, but I think for the world. I think that's the most important UAE can allow. UAE can help as well these technology and innovation to scale up. I think if there is a startup nation book, I think the UAE should have a scale up nation book. That's something that we can help, and that showed very recently in how can companies here can come to the UAE and most probably scale up to become a pioneer in the region and the world as well.
That startup and scale up, because ultimately there's no point doing one without the other, and it really needs to make sure that support is there, that the initiative is there, the political will and the financial support as well, to make sure that so startup and scale up, that's indeed very, very promising in terms of what can happen. And it also takes me on to talk about the role of SMEs in the whole country and the small business, whereby we need to see this actually flourishing. And again, what is the ministry doing, and what do you think the country is doing to support small business in the region?
Before going to the small business, but I think on the scale up and startup book, I think me and you, Ethan, should co-author it, I think, on the way forward.
Like that, yeah, and it's a great title, isn't it? We have it there today. We
have it there today, exactly. On the businesses, and especially on the startup and SMEs, I think it's important to look at the adaptability and how can constantly reinvent the face of the new challenges. SMEs are very agile compared to large corporations. They're very vulnerable. They are very vulnerable to the external shocks, and this is important to tap into these kind of futuristic strategies and enhance their productivities. So this is an opportunity for the businesses, especially the SMEs, to reinvent, to look at the new challenges, to really take them on and really reform the way businesses should conduct. SMEs and startups are the form of the backbone of economies around the world, and here in the UAE, they serve a major driver as well for growth, economic development, and looking at it from a big standpoint of an achievement.
Of course, when we look at SMEs and we look at the growth of SMEs, and also I suppose people looking from the outside, looking in at the moment too, there's still huge development in the country and development to happen too. How important is the ease of doing business? And when you talk to your peers and your colleagues in the government too, is this one thing that's maybe top of your agenda to make sure that people outside looking in and perhaps about to invest in this country are going to be able to do so relatively easy and see a return on their investment?
Of course, in the UAE, the ease of doing business ranking, we really rank on the top top nations in the world. We really focus on the ease of doing business. We're taking down red tape. I think it's important to tackle that as well. It is part of our agenda to enhance it, to improve our standing, to improve the procedures, to take down. And there's a lot of regulations and legislation at the moment in the kitchen, probably in the back kitchen, being cooked. And their objective is more, and they will come in when the time is ready. But they're going to come in with the mindset of helping businesses start up to open easily and move faster to grow and scale up. So it goes back to our Startup and Scale Up Nation book. But this is something that really focuses on the heart of what we do, and especially here in the Ministry of Economy and our agenda as well.
I think we've made a commitment. We've made a public commitment on that one now. We're going to have to get to work on it. But before we do the startup and scale up, again, the UAE has always been a very outward looking and a very forward looking country too, and very much embracing people from indeed around the world. I would imagine there's probably people from every country in the world that are here in some part of the country. Again, the opportunities that are here for people with fresh ideas and creative ideas, that I think is something that's, to be welcomed here. And you think the government is doing enough to make sure that we bring in these creative ideas? And I know there's been establishment of new hubs, and we're looking forward to seeing what some of the new initiatives are going to be. But is it a good time to actually be coming here again with a view to the future?
Absolutely. The government here have placed a lot of initiatives and programs that actually could invite those who have great ideas, disruptive ideas. I'm a big fan of disruption of ideas globally. This is something that I really would like to see and meet people who would like to disrupt the norm. We launched in Dubai Future Foundation, the Dubai 10X back in the days, where we actually invited a lot of startups who can come and help us to disrupt actually the way we do and conduct business in the government. And I think this is today, in the last post as well. We worked on the UAE Regulab, which is a small sandbox helping the entrepreneurs and technology to come in and actually work under kind of a regulation or a gray area regulation where they can help and perform. And I think this is something. And one project that was on it when we started working on it was actually online learning in the UAE Regulab. And when COVID-19 came in, it just boosted that to actually what was happening today and what we do. Everyone is on online learning, and today, and I don't think we're going to go back from that. I think the digital technology and platforms on online, I think, has improved dramatically. We need to look at the business models of schools and education. We need to look at the way that actually we attract such technology, improving the education system, and looking at the future of the economy.
Indeed, when we talk about those disruptive technologies that were in place, and they may have been disruptive at the time, I suppose we now almost look at them as a destination technologies, because as you say, they're here to stay. But perhaps the private sector too really need to, and I think this has possibly given them a time to pull back a little bit and see what has worked, because people have been incredibly agile. They've adopted very quickly, and I think they've also proven their independence and free spirit and initiative that we can actually manage well. And this is the future for the country, and indeed probably for the world, that we all think a little bit differently, perhaps.
Exactly, and absolutely. This is something that we need to really look with the private sector, especially on the aspect of how can we use this technology, have more stimulus boosters, I think, in the economy, because this is the future of what we're doing. Like I said, it's a seed to stay, and then I think it's more investment going to come into this. I think it's more interest as well from the leadership to really look into such future technologies, from robotics, from AI, blockchain, and what's coming next. I think it's important to have the investment in it, and we are, as a government, we're ready. As a government, we have the support, and as a government, we are looking for such approaches where we can actually use, facilitate, and scale it up. And I think this is something that we interested in for the future.
Just to wrap it up, perhaps what, as you look towards your next 90 days, perhaps, and indeed even beyond, to we're in the final quarter of the year, and of course looking forward to 2021, when we sincerely hope there's going to be an uptake in terms of global economic recovery, and indeed specifically here, the focus on the recovery in the UAE. What do you want your other government ministries to do to work with you? And what do you want the people and the residents here in the UAE to do to respond to you, to make sure that we are all aligned and we're all looking to the brighter future that without a doubt has to be out there?
We need to be 100% invested here. I think that's the most important. We need to more have a collaboration and cooperation that exists and work together to create a level of playing field that will help for trade and investments. That's where we need to come together. I think that's the most important. At 100% investments of thought, of ideas, of energy, I think we need to come on the table to do that. On the optimistic note, I thank everyone as well for joining us today and look forward to discussion and presentation that will follow as well.
And we have lots of great speakers and many more ministers to come to, but I really want to thank you, Your Excellency, Abdulla bin Touq Al Marri from the Ministry of Economy. Thank you so much for your continued support, of course, for ABLF, and indeed for being with us here live today. We're so grateful that you've taken the time away from your busy schedule, and good luck with the next 90 days and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to our dear audience. Thanks for being with us. What a great discussion there to really kick off the day there. A very lively, optimistic, forward, future-looking discussion there with His Excellency. And again, as he said, he's embracing this new job and making sure that all the processes are in place to move us to the next level. But some good news when we look at the economy in the region too. There's slowly looking the seeds of the green leaves, the green shoots are beginning to come back. But it's going to be a slow process, but everybody, as he said, needs to be committed, needs to be invested to make sure that we get there. We're going to take a short networking break, and when we come back, I have the delight and the pleasure to be joined by the Minister for Energy and Infrastructure, His Excellency Suhail Al-Mazroui will be joining me in just a few minutes. So in the meantime, take a networking break. Have a look around our wonderful ABLF city, get familiar with it, and make new friends and some business acquaintances along the way. And again, stay with us throughout the day. #ABLF City.